I am not a historian, but neither are you. So, how about we the people learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. And today's episode, guys, this one's for the ladies. I feel like such a because for the entire time that I've been doing US 101, none of the episodes have been about the ladies. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and change all that for this episode, okay? For today's episode, I'm gonna hook you guys up with a ton of facts about some very important people in American history, specifically the first ladies of these United States. Now, while our current First Lady, Melania Trump, has done she's done, what has she done? What has she done? She's had to have done something. There has to be something interesting about Melania Trump besides the fact that she's a former model. Unless, of course, you consider Ivanka Trump to be the First Lady of the White House. In which case, she would be the First Lady to have a clothing line that you can now buy on eBay. We're gonna go ahead and work our way backwards with these First Ladies, which means we're kicking it off with Michelle Obama. And one of the first things that you should know about her is that she is tied for our tallest First Lady, standing at 5'11", the other First Lady being Eleanor Roosevelt. And another fact about Michelle Obama is that she is only one of 3 First Ladies to hold a graduate degree from a university. Those other 2 First Ladies being Laura Bush and Hillary Clinton. And speaking of Laura Bush, she is the only First Lady to give birth to twins, her daughters Jenna and Barbara. She also established the National Book Festival with the Library of Congress and is the first First Lady to deliver a full presidential radio address. And then, of course, we make our way to Hillary Clinton, which, as you know by now, she's the First Lady to be a presidential candidate on a major party ticket. She's also the First Lady to run and be elected to a seat in the Senate, and she also won a Grammy Award back in 1997 for Best Spoken Word Album for her book, It Takes a Village. Barbara Bush is one of 2 First Ladies to serve as both wife and mother to 2 presidents, the other First Lady holding that role being Abigail Adams. I should also point out that Mrs. Bush also once wrote a book based on the perspective of her dog, Millie. Nancy Reagan was the First Lady to appear in a music video. It was for a song called Stop the Madness, which was sponsored by the White House, and the song served as an anti-drug abuse message. Rosalind Carter was the First Lady to have a VCR in the White House. She was also a huge advocate of mental health and even testified before Congress about the Mental Health Systems Bill, which would pass in 1980. Betty Ford, whom most people know from the rehab clinic that she founded in California, was also diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent surgery only a month after becoming First Lady in 1974. Pat Nixon created White House tours for both blind and deaf people, and she was also the First Lady to be seen in public wearing pants. Not kidding about that one. Lady Bird Johnson was a member of the National Park Service's Advisory Board, and she also won a Peabody Award for the television show A Visit to Washington with Mrs. Lyndon B. Johnson on behalf of a more beautiful America. Hopefully she didn't win the award for that long-winded title. But before her, Jackie Kennedy also won an award for a television show. She won an Emmy for a televised tour of the White House. She also spoke 3 different languages outside of English, which were French, Spanish, and Italian, and she opened a fully operational kindergarten on the 3rd floor of the White House. Mamie Eisenhower was the First Lady to appear in a television commercial supporting her husband's candidacy for president. Bess Truman would go on to be our longest living First Lady. She passed away at the ripe old age of 97. Eleanor Roosevelt was the First Lady to fly in an airplane after having dinner with famous aviator Amelia Earhart. She was also the First Lady to hold regular press conferences. She wrote a daily newspaper column, a monthly magazine column, and on her wedding day to FDR, she was walked down the aisle by none other than President Theodore Roosevelt. Lou Hoover, she could speak Chinese fluently, and she was also the first woman to graduate from Stanford University with a degree in geology. It's because of Grace Coolidge that the White House has a 3rd floor and a sunroom on that third floor. She was also the first lady to use sign language and the first one to speak in newsreels that featured sound. Florence Harding was the first lady to vote in a presidential election after the 20th Amendment passed in 1920, which granted women the right to vote. She was also rumored to have poisoned and killed her husband, President Warren G. Harding, in the third year of his presidency to save him from corruption scandals based on the Teapot Dome scandal that he was suffering from. Ellen Wilson died while her husband, President Woodrow Wilson, was in office in 1914. Her daughter Margaret took on the duties of the First Lady until Wilson married Edith Galt in Washington, D.C. in 1915. Helen Nellie Taft was the first Lady to own and drive a car, and she was the first Lady to ride alongside her husband during his inaugural parade. She also initiated the project to plant 3,000 Japanese cherry trees along the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. Since then, the cherry blossoms have become a major part of D.C.'s identity in the springtime. Alice Roosevelt died in 1884, 17 years before her husband Theodore Roosevelt would become President of the United States. But in 1885, Roosevelt would marry Edith Caro, and she was responsible for refurbishing the White House and promoting it as a national treasure. Ida McKinley was an essential person in convincing her husband, William McKinley, to make sure that the United States retained the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. Unfortunately, she was also another First Lady that would see her husband assassinated while he was in office. In this case, McKinley died in 1901. Caroline Harrison was the first Lady to have a Christmas tree in the White House, and she was the first Lady to have electricity in the White House. At 21 years old, Frances Cleveland was the youngest First Lady that we've ever had. She was also the first Lady to be married in the White House and the first Lady to give birth in the White House. And here's a fun fact about one of her kids. Her daughter, Ruth Esther, which was the first child to be born in the White House, would have a candy bar named after her, Baby Ruth. Ellen Arthur died 20 months before her husband Chester A. Arthur took office. And since Chester A. Arthur would never marry after her death, it was up to his sister, Mary McElroy, to take over as White House hostess. And while Ellen Arthur passed away before her husband took office, Lucretia Garfield saw her husband die while he was in office. Lucy Hayes was the first Lady to host an Easter egg roll on the White House lawn. She also had a very interesting nickname, Lemonade Lucy. Nope, not because she was a fan of the Beyoncé album, but because while she was First Lady, she prohibited any alcohol from being consumed during White House functions. Julia Grant was cross-eyed, which is why every time you see a picture of her, she's always sitting profile because she never wanted to be photographed facing forward. She also convinced her husband, Ulysses S. Grant, to not attend a performance that was happening at Ford Theater with their friends Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln. Eliza Johnson was a First Lady that taught her husband, Andrew Johnson, how to spell and how to pronounce words properly. And due to the fact that she suffered from tuberculosis, she didn't really do much of anything else because she was incredibly sick, but she was also a First Lady that brought cows to the White House and would milk them every single morning. Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's First Lady, she used to hold seances in the White House. Also, she was committed to an insane asylum following Abraham Lincoln's assassination by her own son Robert due to her erratic behavior. Harriet Lane, the niece of James Buchanan, served as the White House hostess since James Buchanan is our only bachelor we've ever had as president. Jane Pierce did not do all that much as a First Lady, but that's not because she was like a bad person or anything like that. She was actually just racked with grief because 2 months before Franklin Pierce took the oath of office, she watched her son Benny die in a horrific train accident. She never recovered from her passing, and she would actually become known as the ghost of the White House due to her extreme reclusiveness. Abigail Fillmore was the First Lady to continue working at her career after she had gotten married. She was a school teacher. And because she was a school teacher, she obviously loved books, which is why in 1850, she lobbied Congress to get funds for the first ever library in the Executive Mansion. Margaret Peggy Taylor, Zachary Taylor's First Lady, was the First Lady to not do a damn thing with her role as First Lady. Didn't want to do anything. She just wanted to hang back and chill. She actually relegated all those duties to her daughter, Elizabeth. Sarah Polk was the First Lady to host the White House Thanksgiving dinner. She was also the First Lady to have gas lights in the White House and to have an icebox installed in the White House. And like Lucy Hayes, Sarah Polk also had a peculiar nickname. She had the nickname Sahara Sarah because during White House functions, she forbade drinking, dancing, or card playing from occurring. And the reason they gave her the nickname Sahara Sarah is because her critics called her as dry as the Sahara Desert. Letitia Tyler was the first lady to die while her husband was in office, but Tyler's second wife, Julia, whom he married while he was president, was the first lady to actually be photographed. Anna Harrison, oh, this one sucks, man. Anna Harrison, so she was sick a month before her husband took the oath of office, so she couldn't go to DC with him and join him there. But by the time she got better and made her way to join William Henry Harrison in Washington, DC, he died only a month into his presidency. That is some luck. Hannah Van Buren died 18 years before her husband Martin Van Buren would become president of the United States. So his daughter Angelica became the White House hostess in the last 2 years of his administration. Rachel Jackson. Rachel Jackson actually became an accidental bigamist because when she married Andrew Jackson, she was still married to someone else, even though that she had thought that her first husband had divorced her. But it turned out he hadn't, so she was married to two people at the same time. Awkward! Louisa Adams was the first lady to be born overseas. She was actually born in London, England. Elizabeth Monroe. Elizabeth Monroe actually broke tradition from previous first ladies. See, prior to her, first ladies would call on other wives of other officials in Washington and have them get together for receptions and stuff. But she did not want to do that. She wanted nothing to do with those ladies. And because of that, other wives found that to be rather insulting, which meant that when she would hold White House receptions in the future, none of those wives ever attended. Dolly Madison. Dolly Madison actually became a hero in some respects. Because during the War of 1812, when the British made their way to Washington, D.C., before they burned down the White House, Dolly Madison saved the very famous Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington. Y'all have seen this portrait before. The reason it still exists is because she saved it from the White House before the British burned the house down. Martha Jefferson died 18 years before Thomas Jefferson would become president of the United States. So their daughter, who was also named Martha, coincidentally, would serve as the hostess of the White House. Abigail Adams, like I mentioned earlier, was the other first lady to serve as wife and mother to two presidents, wife to John Adams and mother to John Quincy Adams. She was also a huge advocate for women's rights and equality for women, and while John Adams was actually at the Continental Congress helping to, create the United States of America, she wrote to him and famously told him to, quote, "Remember the ladies," end quote, when building the new nation. And also, she was actually the first lady to live in the White House, which back in the day was actually known as the President's Mansion. It wasn't called the White House. And last but not least, Martha Washington. She was the first lady to be given the title of Lady, so people would call her Lady Washington. She was also the first lady to appear on a U.S. postage stamp, and also, as we now know, famously named her feral tomcat after, yep, Alexander Hamilton. Y'all know the song, y'all know the lyrics. Whew, that is a ton of facts, man. But there you go, man. Some fun facts about the first ladies of the United States. Now you guys can take these facts to parties, and when there's a lull in the conversation between your friends, you can just drop them on a dime. Or if you just want to prove that you're intellectually superior to your friends, use these. And that is it for this episode of US 101, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video, and for those of you that have subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for your support. Guys, there's so many people subscribing to the channel on a daily basis. I can't thank you guys enough for the support. You're making me really appreciate what I do for y'all. Thank you. You can check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/USA History 101. You can follow us on Twitter at USA History 101. And now you can check us out on the Instagram as well. Instagram.com/USA History 101. All those links down below in the description box. Guys, I will see you next Tuesday for another episode of US 101. Until then, we are all done. And to all the first ladies out there, thank you so much. You provided me with a whole bunch of facts for an entire episode. Y'all are the best. I'm going this way now. I am tired. Too many facts, man.